これで声入っていますかね。どうでしょう。ちょっと確認しますよ。入ってるね。なんだこれ。なんだこれ。いや、なんかポップガードからやけに甘い匂いがするんだけど。これあれだな。ニベアだな。ニベアの匂いだこれ。そうか、昨日匂い移っちゃったか。まあ臭いわけじゃないからいいか。危ねえ。ニベアの匂いすごいいいよね。ニベア好きなんだよね、匂いが。部屋に充満させたい。まあ充満してるんだろうけどね、多分すでに充満してるから、このポップガードの匂いがニベアになってるんだろうけど。ちょっと待ってね。袋とお酒を持ってくる。あ、その前にちょっと一回ゲームつないだ方がいいか。今日のお酒は何にしようかな。おお、びっくりした。この状態で PS リモートプレイでアクセスすればミラーリングはできるはずですよ。わお、なんか画面がそこの画面映るんだ。まあ確かに名前同じだけどよ。おや、なあ、そうかそうか。ケーブル。ちなみにだけどね、今日はこれの映像を見る予定なんだけど、映像っつっても4つとかしかないから1時間もかからずに終わっちゃうと思うんだよね、その部分。その後は酒飲み雑談になります。ごめん、ちょっと目薬取ってくるわ。いで膝が。画面のバランスこれでいいかな。ちょっとゲーム画面小さかったらごめんね。さて、でだ。ああ、そういえば確認しとくの忘れてたな。まあいいや。 くりやりましょう。時間はバカみたいにあるんで。そうだ、手袋。とりあえず操作できるな。ちょっと1分くらい待って。はいはい、失礼。コメントのテストをして始めましょう。人が全くいない状態でこれを見始めてもなんかすぐ見終わっちゃって、一人で見終わって誰か最初に来た時にはもう全部終わったわってなっても悲しいんで、少しだけねゆっくりしますね。5分か10分くらい。雑談というかお酒というかの話をしましょう。これさ、雑談か。ノスタルジアの映像が過去に一度バンというか著作権でダメっていう風に言われた件についてのことをさっきちょっと調査したんですよ。そしたらあれはいつかな、でも何年か前とかの記事だったと思うんだけど、ウィットネスとかあとブレイドが同じ作者なんだね。作者というか関係者の人がウィットネスに関する自分の動画で YouTube の自動コンテンツ ID チェッカーでソニーに著作権のあるどのコーナーでなんかしょっぴかれたみたいなことに対してすごく文句を言っているっていう記事を見かけて、で他にもちょっといろいろ調べてみたんだけど、ウィットネスのノスタルジア部分のみに絞った YouTube の動画とかがあって、これがねブロックされてねえんだわ。自分ちょっとそれは不思議というか疑問に思ってて、あれ何なんだろう。どっかに許可取ったのかな、それとも基本的にあれ別にいいよっていうスタンスを取ってるけど ID チェッカーが暴発して自分は不運にあれを食らってしまったとか、そういう話なのかな。なんか微妙に判断ができなくってさ。こんにちは、いらっしゃい。このウィットネスの映像を全部集めたんで、これの鑑賞会をしようっていう感じで、ただ配信始めて直後にすぐ見始めてもどうせ4つとかしか残ってなくってさ、人が来た時にはごめん全部見終わったわみたいなもんないやつ考察のしがいというか、でもやっぱり、考察するたちではないけど、やっぱコンプリート癖というかある自分としては全部見たいんだよね。そう全部見終わっちゃったからもう別のことしてるよって発信的になってもつまらないので、ちょっとささくれ防止の集めてもおっさんがベラベラ喋ってるだけ、それ BBC のやつじゃない？ 2 つ目とかよくわからない映画とか流れるよ。このゲーム自体は初見じゃない。2年くらい前にやって配信でトロコンまでやったんだけど、映像はね、ごめんちょっと手袋しないと手がベタベタで、この6個あるうち2つ発見して残りの4つは まだ確認をしてない状態で、ただこの見るためのパズルは開放 してあるので、過去の自分の配信とかスクリーンショットを確認しながらこれを見ようというわけですね。で1人2人くらい来たら見始めるのに、来たらっていうか見てる人がいたら見始めるんだけど、人数は別にわざわざ数えなくてささくれ防止のクリーム的なものを塗る間待ってっていう、その間ちょっと休憩というか一瞬時間を置くくらいでちょうどいいんじゃないかい。前髪うぜヘッドホンじゃない、マイクの前につけてるポップガードがすごいいい匂いしててさっきなんだろうって思って、それで思い出したのよ。ささくれ対策してないって。もうね、すごいささくれできんのよ自分。すごいの、本当に。何もできないくらい痛くなっちゃうから、結構念入りにやっておかないと、この乾燥する季節は。そうそう。で、ノスタルジアの部分だけをピックした動画とかが見られる状態で残ってて、これはなんだって思ったんだけど、それと自分の配信の違いがどうなのかもわかんなくって、とりあえずちょっと弾いてみるとかいろいろ試す。でも残りが全部 BBC っていう可能性もあるし、タルコフスキー監督のやつにやられちゃってね。これで手袋したら完成なんでちょっと待ってね死んでしまうんですよ、指が。指の皮膚が全部剥がれて指紋がなくなり、爪側はささくれで真っ赤になり出血しガサガサになりみたいな。小学生の時になんかちょっと変なストレス性の皮膚病を発症してから、もう全身弱くてさ、その皮膚が少し気にしてあげないとすぐだってかさ、大丈夫か。さて、じゃあ始めていこうか。でね、少々お待ちを。そうなるよね。少々お待ちください。画面隠して、手袋曲がってんだけど。スクリーンショット、過去のものとかをまとめ忘れているなぁというふうに自分は思ったわけだがそれはそうと、一旦だからそれを確認するだけでもしてしまおうか。これとこれは今回収集したもの。これが多分砂漠の下のやつで、 これが、山の中にあるやつで、それからこれは TA かな。でこれがナンパ線。あ、画面止まった。最新のスクショにちょっと更新して入れて、 TA は最後に取っとこう。あれ確かに最後っぽいね。どれが順序的にどれがかなっていう話なんだけど、この最初のやつはさ、庭出てすぐのでしょ。このぐるぐるしてるのって街の隣、地下とかから行けるコンテナの中にあるやつで、じゃあ順序的に2つ目ってどれかなって考えると、なんか最後の2つはナンパ線タイムアタックな気がするんだよね。だからこの砂漠のこれ、ぐるっと回すのか。ここからこうだ。やっぱり2つ目だ。ヒトラーでは
And therefore, the existence in the world of all these other elements is very closely related to the fact that there is this particular level in carbon. But the position of this particular level in carbon seems to us, after knowing the physical laws, to be a very complicated accident of 12 complicated particles interacting. So I wish to illustrate by this example that an understanding of the physical laws doesn't give you an understanding in a sense of understanding significance of the world in any way. The details of real experience are very far often from the fundamental laws. There are, in a way of speaking in the world, we have a way of discussing the world which you could call, we discuss it at various hierarchies or levels. Now, I don't mean to be very precise, there's a level, there's another level, and another level, but I will indicate by describing a set of ideas to you, just one after the other, what I mean by hierarchies of ideas. For example, at one end, we have the fundamental laws of physics. Then we invent other terms for concepts which are approximate, who have, we believe, the ultimate explanation in terms of the fundamental laws. For instance, heat. Heat is supposed to be the jiggling, and it's just a word for a hot thing is just a word for a mass of atoms which are jiggling. For that, fundamentally, we should think of the atoms jiggling.
これあれか、ファインマンか。
If we're talking about heat, we sometimes forget about the atoms jiggling. Just like when we talk about the glacier, we don't always think of the hexagonal ice snowflakes which
もうちょっと
originally
映像
fell.
の音がでかい方がいい？
Another example of the same thing is a salt crystal. Looked at fundamentally, a lot of protons, neutrons, and electrons.
ちょっと
But
今
we
回
have this
はお
concept
とな
of
し
salt
く
crystal, which carries a whole pattern already of fundamental interactions. Or
音
idea
量
like
調整
pressure.
に
Now, if we go
勤しんで
higher up from this,
見
in
直
another
そうか、これ
level,
は。
we have properties of substances like refractive index, how light is bent when it goes through something, or surface tension, the fact that the water tends to pull itself together, is described by a number. I remind you that we have to go through several laws down to find out that it's the pull of the atoms and so on, but we still say surface tension, and don't worry when we're discussing surface tension of the inner
このくらい
working
でどうで
always.
しょう。
Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Go on, up in the hierarchy. With the water, we have the waves, and we have a thing like a storm. We have a word for storm, which represents an enormous mass of phenomena. Or sunspot, or star, which is an accumulation of things. And it's not worthwhile always to think of it way back. In fact, we can't, because the higher up we go, we have too many steps in between, each one of which is a little weak, and we haven't thought them all through yet.
よかった。
And we go up in this hierarchy of complexity, we get to things like throb
画面が足りね
or
え。
nerve impulse, which you see is an enormously complicated thing in the physical world, involving an organization of matter in a very elaborate complexity. And then we go on, we come to things, words, and concepts like man and history or political expediency and so forth, which is a series of concepts that we use to understand things at an ever higher level. And going on, we come to things like evil and beauty and hope. Now, which end is nearer to the ultimate creator or the ultimate? So if I make a religious metaphor, which end is nearer to God? Beauty and hope or the fundamental laws?
ね。
I think that the right way, of course, is to say that the whole structural interconnections of the thing is the thing that we have to look at, and that the sequence of hierarchy, that all the sciences and all the efforts, not just the sciences, but all the efforts of intellectual time, are to see the connections of the hierarchies is to connect beauty to history, is to connect history to man's psychology, the man's psychology to the working of the brain to the neural impulse to the chemistry, and so forth, up and down, both ways. And today we cannot, and there's no use making believe we can, draw carefully a line all the way from one end of this thing to the other. In fact, we've just begun to see that there is this relative hierarchy. And so I don't think either end is nearer to God's. And to stand at either end and to walk out off the end of the pier only, hoping out in that direction is the complete understanding, is a mistake. And to stand with evil and beauty and hope, or to stand with the fundamental laws, hoping that way to get a deep understanding of the whole world with that aspect alone, is a mistake. And it is not sensible either for the ones who specialize at one end and the ones who specialize at the other end to have such disregard for each other. They don't actually, but the people say they do. So. But that actually the great mass of workers in between, connecting one step to another, are improving all the time our understanding of the world, both from working at the ends and working in the middle. And in that way, we are gradually understanding this connection, this tremendous world of interconnecting hierarchies.
If you expected science to give all
続くんだ
the
これ。
wonderful questions about
終わったかと
what we
思ったら。
are, where we're going, what the meaning of the universe is, and so on, then I think you could easily become disillusioned and then look for some mystic answer to these problems. How a scientist can take a mystic answer, I don't know, because the whole spirit is to understand. Well, never mind that. I don't understand that. But anyhow, if you think of it, though, the way I think of what we're doing is we're exploring. We're trying to find out as much as we can about the world. People say to me, "Are you looking for the ultimate laws of physics?" No, I'm not. I'm just looking to find out more about the world. And if it turns out there is a simple ultimate law that explains everything, so be it. That would be very nice to discover. If it turns out it's like an onion with millions of layers and we're just sick and tired of looking at the layers, then that's the way it is. But whatever way it comes out, its nature is there and she's going to come out the way she is. And therefore, when we go to investigate it, we shouldn't pre-decide what it is we're trying to do except to find out more about it. If you say, but your problem is, why do you find out more about it? If you thought that you were trying to find out more about it because you're going to get an answer to some deep philosophical question, you may be wrong. It may be that you can't get an answer to that particular question by finding out more about the character of nature. But I don't look at it. My interest in science is to simply find out about the world. And the more I find out, the better it is. I like to find out. There are very remarkable mysteries about the fact that we're able to do so many more things than apparently animals can do. And other questions like that. But those are mysteries I want to investigate without knowing the answer to them. And so altogether, I can't believe the special stories that have been made up about our relationship to the universe at large, because they seem to be too simple, too connected, too local, too provincial. The earth, he came to the earth. One of the aspects of God came to the earth, mind. And look at what's out there. How can it isn't in proportion. Anyway, it's no use arguing. I can't argue it. I'm just trying to tell you why the scientific views that I have do have some effect on my beliefs. And also another thing has to do with the question of how do you find out if something's true? And if you have all these theories of the different religions have all different theories about the thing, then you begin to wonder. Once you start doubting, just like you're supposed to doubt, you ask me if science is true. You say, no, we don't know what's true. We're trying to find out. Everything is possibly wrong. Start out understanding religion by saying everything is possibly wrong. Let us see. As soon as you do that, you start sliding down an edge, which is hard to recover from. And so with the scientific view, or my father's view, that we should look to see what's true and what may not be true. Once you start doubting, which I think to me is a very fundamental part of my soul, is to doubt and to ask. And when you doubt and ask, it gets a little harder to believe. You see, one thing is I can live with doubt and uncertainty and not knowing. I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers which might be wrong. I have approximate answers and possible beliefs and different degrees of certainty about different things, but I'm not absolutely sure of anything. And then many things I don't know anything about, such as whether it means anything to ask why we're here and what the question might mean. I might think about it a little bit. If I can't figure it out, then I go to something else. But I don't have to know an answer. I don't feel frightened by not knowing things, by being lost in the mysterious universe without having any purpose, which is the way it really is as far as I can tell, possibly. It doesn't frighten me.
今の終わった音か。ピュンっつった。自分こういう映像を見ながらこう夜に酒を飲むっていうのが結構好きなんだけど、でもやっぱり未だにこのゲームの内容とこの映像たちの結びつきがどういう意図で、そうか、違う、撮ったのパソコンじゃなくてこっちのスクショだ。どういう意図でこういう形式にしてるのかっていうのは自分まだ汲み取れてないね。あと3つあるわけだけど、順番的には砂漠から行くか。違う、今のが砂漠だよ。だからコングラチュレーションじゃない。ナンパ戦、タイムアタック、山でしょ。タイムアタックを最後に取っておいて、ナンパ戦と山どっち行こうか。どっちが先っぽいかな。でも山だよね、難易度的に。ナンパ戦の方が前ってことねえよな。でも難易度順じゃないか。これ360回したら元に戻るね。180度回してこうでしょ。なるほどなるほど。こうだ。ちゃう。こうだ。こうだ。最後になっちゃった。じゃあもう順番なんでもいいや。タイムアタック最後に取っとこう。
And I'm still deeply discovering the reverberation of that. And it's simply stop looking for what you want. Not cynically stop looking for what you want. Because there's a way of stopping looking for what you want in resignation and cynicism and closing down. But innocently, openly, stop looking for what you want in this moment, not tomorrow when you have it, but But in this moment, to take one moment, whatever it is you want,
なんか映像がさっきよりだいぶ新しく
however
見える。
mundane or profound, and
でも
just
画質
stop
綺麗だよね。
looking for it. And you will find
順序逆。
more than what you could ever
こ
want.
れ山のやつだけど、だから山のやつ最後なんだ
Because
ね。
more than what can be wanted.
タイムアタックの方が位置的には後だけどね、多分。ちょっとタイムアタックの場所思い出せないけど。
Too simple to be grasped, but absolutely, completely realizable. If, and it is a huge if, of course, you are willing to give up your hope that what you want will be found in the next thought, or the next activity, or the next day, or the next man, or the next woman, or the next teaching, or the next experience. So that's huge. That's the challenge. And I've blessedly traveled to Australia to challenge you in that direction, that directionless direction. It's so simple that it has to be said over and over, because it just slips right by the mind. And if it's said over and over and in enough ways and then not said, it can just be revealed. Not as something new, but as something absolutely fresh. Not new, but fresh. Who you are is not new, but it is always fresh. Who you think you are is old and dead. We just keep trying to think it a little better, squeeze some life. Is that clear? It is? Because that's really the basis of what I have to say. It's not a teaching. It's not a belief system. It's not a way to live your life. It's not a should stop. It's not an if you stop, you will be rich and famous and universally loved and never have a sad moment. None of that, I promise. But if you're willing to investigate for yourself without believing it or learning it or hoping to get something from it, just a pure investigation out of the natural curiosity of the human mind, just to investigate for yourself what is here when I stop trying to get anything, and how much of that is here, and where does that begin and where does that end? And then the question, am I willing to trust that? And then the challenges get very big. But we'll get to that later. Any questions about what I just said? Want me to say it
これって
again?
何の公演なんだろう。
You already are everything you want, only maybe not in the way you imagine what you want. And it's that imagination itself that keeps you from discovering
自己
that
啓
you
発の
already
一種み
are
たいな
everything you want.
ことなのかな。
So if you just take this evening as an experiment to give up any imagination, any image of what you need to be totally fulfilled. Just give it up. It's just an image, just a thought. Maybe a spiritual thought, maybe a worldly thought, a relationship thought, career thought. Just give it up. And directly discover what's here, unthought, unimagined. How's that? Good. Good.
おや、終わった。何パーセントこれか、何パーセント。うわ、暗くて見えない。暗くて見えないよ、これ。ああ、でも。こんな感じ。おお。どちら様？なんだこの映像は。なんで喋り出さないんだ。あ、喋る。
Know yourself as the open, empty, luminous presence of awareness. Open because you say yes unconditionally and indiscriminately to all appearances of the mind, body, and world. Like empty space, you have no mechanism inherent within you that can resist any appearance. We don't have to make this the case, it is already the case. Empty, because although you, I, this aware presence, is aware of thoughts, sensations, and perceptions, it is not made out of a thought, a sensation, or a perception. It is made out of pure knowing or awareness. And luminous, because just like the sun, relatively speaking, that renders all objects seeable, so you, I, this open, empty presence, renders all experience knowable. In fact, we don't really see objects, relatively speaking, illumined by the sun. We just see reflections or modulations of the sun's light, appearing as a multiplicity and diversity of color. In the same way, we don't really know the objects of the mind, body, and the world. We just know our knowing of them. All we know, all that is known, is the knowing of experience. And you are that knowing. All that is ever known is a modulation of our own knowing presence, modulating itself in the form of thinking, sensing, and perceiving, and seeming to become a mind, a body, and a world. But we never actually know a mind, a body, and a world as they are normally conceived. We just know our knowing of them. And this knowing, the substance of our experience, the only substance of our experience, is ourself. In other words, we know ourself alone. Awareness knows nothing other than itself. Be knowingly this open, empty, luminous presence of awareness. We don't need to do anything special to make this happen. Above all, we don't have to manipulate the mind in any way whatsoever to be this presence of awareness. This presence of awareness, which is simply our self, what we refer to when we say I, is ever present. Just check this in your own experience. Nothing that I am saying this evening, there is nothing that cannot be checked in your own direct experience right now. I bring no special knowledge to this meeting. I don't have a store of knowledge which I am disseminating. I'm just, within the limits of language, trying to describe the current experience. Ask yourself, do I know anything other than now? Try to experience the not now. Try first to experience the past. It's easy to experience a thought about the past. But what about the actual past to which this thought refers? Try to experience that. Can you step into the past? Can you go 1 second into the past? Or 1 second into the future? Thought can go there. But what about you? Really try to go there to make sure that this is not just an interesting philosophical conversation, but that it is actually your experience. That the past and the future are never experienced. And if the past and the future are never actually experienced, they are only thought about. And that thought about the past and the future is always now. If this past and future are never experienced, what does that say about time? Time is a movement between a non-existent past towards a non-existent future. It's a theory, a necessary and valid theory, but a theory that doesn't refer to the reality of our experience. nobody has ever or could ever experience time. When I say nobody, I mean yourself, awareness, the only one that knows or is aware. When I arrived off the plane from London in Washington, D.C. last weekend before coming here, the friend who picked me up asked me how the flight was, and she said, how long did it take? And I experienced thought being cranked up like an old motor, a little resistant to get going. And for a moment, I could feel the cogs of thought almost moving, trying to work out how much time the flight had taken. Because in my experience, it had been now all the way. I had never left London. London had left me. I had never got onto an aeroplane, a flow of sensations and perceptions that thought abstracts and calls a body in an aeroplane, flowed through me. And I never arrived in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. arrived in me, or at least the cluster of perceptions that thought calls Washington, D.C. arrived in me. In the same way, nobody ever walked into this room, and nobody is sitting on a chair, and nobody is listening to a talk. A colorful flow of sensations and perceptions appears in awareness. But awareness never goes anywhere or does anything. It is always here and now, not here a place and now a time. Here, this dimensionless, now this timeless presence of our own being. That is our experience, whether we recognize it or not. Now the mind may feel a little rebellious when it hears this. It may say, yes, 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 that's true, but there is an undeniable continuity to my experience. And this undeniable continuity would seem to be evidence of time. Where does this felt sense of continuity come from? All we know of the mind is the current thought or image. And thoughts and images are intermittent. The body is known through sensation, and all sensations are intermittent. All we know of the world is perception, that is, sights, sounds, tastes, textures, and smells. In fact, nobody has ever experienced a world as such, a world as it is normally conceived to be. We just know the current perception. And all perception is intermittent. So if the so-called mind, body, and world are intermittent,
なんか今音変
from where does this felt sense of continuity come from? It comes from the only thing, if we can call it a thing, that is truly continuous, or in fact not continuous, but ever present now in our experience, and that is our own being, the presence of awareness. The presence of awareness is the only thing that is known to be ever present. Now the mind knows nothing of awareness because the mind only knows apparent objects. So when the mind looks at experience to find what it is that accounts for continuity, it cannot see awareness. And so it manufactures a substance called time to account for the continuity of experience. In other words, continuity in time is what eternity looks like when viewed through the narrow slit of the mind. Permanence in space is what the infinite, unlimited nature of awareness looks like when viewed through the narrow slit of the mind. Continuity and permanence are pale reflections at the level of the mind of the true, eternal and infinite nature of awareness, that is, of our self.
ちょっと鼻をかみます。
What else can we say about ourself from our actual experience? Which means right now, what can we know for certain about ourself? Not what thought may tell us about ourself, but what we actually know in this moment, derived only from our experience of ourself. Ask yourself, can I, this open, empty, knowing presence, can I be agitated? Thought can be agitated. Sensations, or the body, can be agitated. The world can be agitated. But what about you, the one that knows the apparent mind, body, and world? Can you, this open, empty presence, be agitated? See, in your experience right now, that you are, and this of course is just an image, are like an open, empty space, such as the space of this room. Nothing that appears within this room can agitate it. We are all sitting peacefully now, but if we were to stand up and start dancing or fighting, would the space of this room become agitated? You are like that. You, I, the presence of awareness, are undisturbable, imperturbable. We don't need to become imperturbable, and this undisturbability of ourself is not dependent upon the condition of the mind. Right now, you, awareness, are utterly imperturbable, and for this reason, another name for ourself is peace. Peace is not a quality that ourself has, it is what ourself is. Not peace of mind. Minds are more or less agitated. This peace that passeth understanding, that is not of the mind. It doesn't have to be sought, It is not hiding in the background of experience. This very awareness that is seeing, hearing, knowing, is pure peace itself, shining in all experience, however apparently agitated that experience may be. Ask yourself, can I, this presence of awareness, ever lack something? Thoughts can say that something is missing. Feelings can say that something is missing. But what about you? Without referring to thought or feeling, is there the slightest motive in you to avoid the now and replace it with the not now? See that in yourself, this presence of awareness, there is not the slightest impulse or possibility to avoid the now. And what do we call this absolute absence of resistance to the now? The absolute absence of resisting what is and seeking what is not. What is the common name we give to this? It is called happiness. We all know that when we are happy, we are by definition not resisting the now and seeking in the past or the future. By happiness, of course, I do not mean a pleasant state of the mind or the body. I mean this absolute impossibility of ourself ever to resist or seek. To resist what is and to seek what is not. So happiness, like peace, is just another name for ourself. It is not a quality that ourself has, it is what ourself is. What else can we say for certain based on this current experience about ourselves? When I was driving here, or being driven here, the day before yesterday, from the airport in San Francisco, I was looking in the wing mirror of the passenger seat, and I noticed the words inscribed at the bottom of the wing mirror. And they said, "Objects in the mirror are closer than you think." A statement of pure non-duality. Objects that appear in the mirror of consciousness are closer than we think. How close to a mirror are the objects that appear in it? Are there in fact two things? One and two, the mirror? Or is it all just mirror? All we know of the apparent mind is the experience of thinking. And thinking is just a modulation of yourself, a modulation of knowing or awareness. All we know of the apparent body is the experience of sensing. And sensing is a modulation of yourself, awareness. All we know of the apparent world is the experience of seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling. These are all modulations of knowing, modulations of ourself. In other words, we never truly know a mind or a body or a world. These labels are just abstractions that thought superimposes on the intimacy of our experience. From the point of view of experience, which is the only real point of view, experience is much closer, much more intimate, so close as to not admit the possibility of two things. One, myself, awareness, and two, the object that I know. Even that is an abstraction. It may be a useful stepping stone, a halfway understanding to conceive of thoughts, sensations, and perceptions arising in awareness. But nothing arises in awareness. The only substance of all experience, the only substance of thinking, sensing, and perceiving is already awareness. What do we call this absolute absence of two things? A subject that knows and an object that is known. Take now the experience of hearing. Go to the sound of the air conditioning. Forget about the labels sound and air conditioning. Our only knowledge of the apparent air conditioning is the experience of hearing. How close does hearing take place to you? 5 meters away? 10 meters away? Refer only to your experience, not to what thought tells you about sound. Where is hearing? Is it close? Intimate? And in the experience of hearing, can you find two parts? One part that hears, and another part that is heard? Or is it just one seamless, intimate substance called myself? And what about this room? Thought says, I, the inside self in here, sees the room, the outside world, out there. But what does experience say? All we know of the apparent room is the experience of seeing. Remove seeing, and the room vanishes. In other words, we don't know a room. We just know the experience of seeing. Does seeing take place 5, 10, 15 meters away from yourself? Or is seeing utterly intimate? And can you find two parts to the experience of seeing? One part that sees, and another part that is seen? Or is it just one seamless, intimate substance? And what is the name, the common name we give to the absolute intimacy of all experience? It is called love. love is the most familiar experience that we all know, the collapse or dissolution of the sense of a self in here and an object, other, or world out there. The collapse of this sense of separateness, distance, otherness, not me-ness, is what we call love. Love is just another name for non-duality. If we call it non-duality, there's just a few thousand of us in the world that are interested in it. But if we call it love, or peace, or happiness, then all 7 billion of us are interested in it. So why is it, if love, peace, happiness are the natural condition of all experience, the substance out of which all experience is made, how is it that it seems not to be experienced? It is because of a single thought that rises in awareness, made only of awareness, which imagines that awareness shares the limits of the thoughts, feelings, and sensations that appear within it. It is like imagining that a mirror shares the limits of the objects that appear in it. With that thought alone, the ever-present, unlimited awareness, which is what we are, seems
この人の
to
話
acquire or take
全
on
体が
the apparent limits of the body
非
and
二
the
元の
mind,
ことらしいというかぽいね。
just as the screen seems to take on the limits of an image when a film begins. As a result of this imaginary collapse or contraction of our self, unlimited
30分以上経ってるってマジ
into a body and a mind,
この映像で
these qualities of love, peace, and happiness are seemingly veiled. And it is for this reason that the self, the separate self that thought imagines us to be,
映像の長さにさ
is always,
ム
by
ラがめちゃくちゃあ
definition,
るよね。
on a search
さっきの夫人の映像なんて半分くらいだったよ。
for the apparently lost love, peace, and happiness. However, this imaginary inside self cannot, by definition, find the love that it seeks, because its very presence, its apparent presence, is the veiling of that love. All the separate self seeks is love. In fact, the separate self is not an entity that searches, it is the activity of resisting the now and seeking the not now. All this seeking ever wants is love. But love is the dissolution of this seeking, the dissolution of this imaginary self. In other words, the separate self that seeks love is like a moth that seeks a flame. The flame is all the moth wants, but it is the only thing it cannot have. Because as the moth touches the flame, it dies. That is its way of knowing the flame. It becomes the flame as it touches it. That is the separate self's way of finding love, by dying in it. The death or dissolution of the separate self is the experience of love. So simply be knowingly this open, empty, luminous presence of awareness, whose nature, whose inherent nature is love, peace, and happiness. Not a love, peace, and happiness that is in the background of experience that has to be sought, but that is shining in full view at the heart of all experience. In fact, experience is made out of this substance called peace or happiness.
この人の話結構好きで割と黙って聞いちゃったけど長いねさすがにちょっと長かったね。ちょっとお手洗い行ってきますね。休憩時間ということで。自分さ、動画の映像の数所詮4つだから1時間もかからずに雑談タイム入るわとか言ってたけどさ、あと1つを残して1時間経っちゃったんだよね。ちょっとお手洗い行ってくる。そんなちょっとどうかしてるところがいいっていう見方もありますからね。さて、で本当にこれ順番謎だね。意味わかんないね。庭の外、砂漠、コンテナの中、タイムアタック、今のはナンパ船、山の中腹。上の方か中腹というより割と意味わかんないよね、順番。うわ難しい。あ、でも向きそのまんまだ。大丈夫、じゃあ覚えた。あんまり深く考えないでいい形だからこれならいける。こうなんだけどちょっと休憩しよう少し喋ろう。マジで30分ほとんど喋んなかったからさ、 マイクありで配信してる人間としてちょっと一回声入れといた方がいい気がする。僕そういう感覚がちょっと今自分の中にある。でも面白いというか、面白いと思って、自分はああいう最初普通になんかおじさんの思想の話かと思ってたら、なんだっけ、非二元論みたいなよくわかんない言葉出てきて、でそれ話聞きながらそれが何なのか調べてみたけど、今の話自体がその非二元論についてのことを言ってたみたいねの話だったけど、なんかそういう話をしてるのを聞くのは結構好きで、なんかウイスキーずっとぐるぐる回しながら、気づいたら30分気づいたら30分だし、気づいたら角瓶がなくなってるなあなんて思いながら。でもそう、さっき言いかけたけど、これ動画4つ見るだけなんだから1時間で終わるだろうみたいなことを言って始めたら、まさかの1本で30分超え、35、6分くらいだったかな。長かったね。今の人のなんだろう、間が独特というか、間の話でもないか、結構喋り方がゆっくりなのもね、長い要因かもしれないけどね。次行きましょうか。たださ、ここでコントロールできるわけじゃないのか。始めてから言うのもあれだけどさ、バッハじゃん。The Art of Fuga ですね。プツって消えた。
witnessed a total eclipse of the sun.
路面の話か。
To stand one day in the shadow of the moon is one of my humble goals.
ノスタルジアの時はエンドロールがあったから分かったけど、
over 30 years ago. On
全然誰
February
だか分かんない。
26, 1979, a solar eclipse passed directly over the city of Portland. I bought my bus tickets and found a place to stay, but in the end, I couldn't get the time off work.
なんで
Well,
BGM バッ
anyone
ハ
who
なん
lives
だろ
in
うね。
Portland can tell you that the chances of catching the sun in February are pretty slim. And sure enough, the skies over the city that day were completely overcast. I wouldn't have seen a thing. That work I couldn't get out of was my first job out of college. A sales clerk at an old Radio Shack store in beautiful downtown Worcester, Massachusetts.
フーガの技法は
On
あ
my
れです
very
よ。
first day behind the counter,
仕
a
掛けが
delivery truck pulled up to the front of the store,
仕掛けが多いので楽譜見ながら聞いてほしい。
upon which was printed the legend TRS-80. It was our floor sample of the world's first mass-market microcomputer. The TRS-80 Model 1 had a Z80 processor clocked at 1.7 megahertz, 4,096 bytes of memory, and a 64-character black and white text display. The only storage was a cassette recorder. All this could be yours for the low, low price of $599. The store I was working in had seen better days. At one time, it had been near the center of a thriving commercial district. But like so many other New England cities, the advent of shopping malls had, by the early 70s, turned it into a ghost town. Worcester's solution to this problem was decisive, to say the least. The city's elders apparently decided that if they couldn't beat them, they would join them. And so, several square blocks at the heart of the city were bulldozed into oblivion, destroying dozens of family businesses, including the site of a pharmacy once operated by my great-grandfather. In their place was erected a vast three-level shopping complex with cinemas and a food court. When the dust settled, only a few forlorn blocks of the old Worcester remained standing. My Radio Shack store was in one of those blocks. Then, to add insult to injury, Radio Shack opened a brand new location inside the shopping center, less than 500 feet from my store. So now patrons had a choice between a clean, well-lighted establishment with uniformed security and acres of convenient parking, or a shadowy hole in a seedy old office building next to an adult movie theater. Consequently, I had plenty of time to fool around with the new computer. I taught myself basic programming. Then I learned Z80 assembly, both, of course, so that I could write games. I also created self-running animated demos, which ran all night in the store window for the edification of the winos who peed in our doorway. Strangely enough, the few customers we had didn't seem to be interested in our new computer, even after the 16K memory upgrade. In fact, most of the people who set off the buzzer on their way through the front door weren't there to buy anything at all. They were there to exploit a free promotion, which was the bane of Radio Shack employees for over 40 years. The Battery of the Month Club. The idea of this promotion was simple. Customers got a little red card upon which was printed a square for each month. 12 times a year, the lucky sales clerk got to punch out a square and give the customer one brand new AAA, AA, C, D, or 9-volt battery. Of course, customers weren't allowed to choose just any grade of battery. At the time of my employment, Radio Shack offered 3 different levels of battery excellence. First were the alkalines, powerful, long-lasting, and expensive, hanging behind the counter like prescription medication in gold-embossed blister packs. These were most certainly not available through the Battery of the Month Club. Next were the high-end lead batteries, sturdy, dependable batteries, moderately priced, and prominently displayed near the front of the store. These were also not available through the Battery of the Month Club. Finally, at the bottom of the barrel were the standard lead batteries. These were literally piled in barrels, cunningly located way at the back of the store, in a dark corner near the TV antennas. Remember TV antennas? Customers who came in looking for their free Battery of the Month had to walk the entire length of the premises, past the CB radios and stereo headphones and remote-controlled racing cars. Nothing would stop them. On the first day of every month, like clockwork, those customers came in waving their little red cards. I would look up from my programming and wave them to the back of the store. It didn't matter that the batteries were only worth 29 cents. It didn't matter that most of them were already half dead. They came, and as far as I can remember, not one of them ever paid for a damn thing.
リモートプレイの接続が悪くてたまに映像と音が切れます。
I was young
今みたいに。
and foolish. I thought my education in game design was happening at the keyboard. I almost missed the lesson coming through the front door. Fortunately, I wasn't the only person fooling around with games on micros. All over the country, people like me were experimenting. Scott Adams was coding what would soon become the world's first commercial adventure game. Remember adventure games? My future employer, Infocom, was being founded, along with other legendary companies like Online Systems, Sirius, Personal Software, and SSI. Those were exciting times. Teenagers were making fortunes. Games were cheap and easy to build. The slate was clean. But in 1979, the biggest news in gaming had nothing to do with computers. On the morning of the autumn equinox, September 20th, a new children's picture book appeared in the stores of Great Britain. This picture book was rather peculiar. It consisted of 15 meticulously detailed color paintings, illustrating a slight whimsical tale about a rabbit delivering a jewel
後ろで
to
流れ
the
てる
moon.
バッハの
On
風
the
が
back jacket of the book
1時間
was
半
a
ある
color
曲なんだ
photograph
けど
of a real jewel, shaped like a running rabbit, 5 inches long, fashioned of
順調
18
に
karat gold,
進んでるのはこれまさか1時
suspended
間
with
以上
ornaments and bells, together with a sun
1時間
and
20
moon
分あっ
of
たら
blue
笑っちゃう
quartz. According to the blurb underneath, this very jewel had been buried somewhere in England. Clues pointing to its location were concealed in the text and in the pictures of the book. The treasure would belong to whoever found it first. The book was called Masquerade. It was created by an eccentric little man with divergent eyes and a talent for mischief named Kit Williams. Within days, the first printing was sold out, and the empire that never sleeps found itself in the grip of rabbit fever. Excited readers attacked the paintings with rulers, compasses, and protractors. Magazine articles and TV specials dissected the clues, floated theories, and followed with keen delight the reckless exploits of the fanatics. One obscure park, unfortunately known by the nickname Rabbit Hill, was so riddled with holes excavated by misguided treasure seekers that the authorities had to erect signs assuring the public that no gold rabbits were to be found there. Some hunters ended up seeking psychological counseling for their obsession. The craze leapt over the Atlantic Ocean and invaded America, France, Italy, and Germany. It sold over 1 million copies in a few months, a record unrivaled by any children's title until the advent of Harry Potter. Over 150,000 copies were sold in foreign translations, including 80,000 copies in Japanese, despite the fact that the puzzle was only solvable in English. It didn't matter that the Masquerade jewel was only worth a few $1,000s. Many seekers spent far more than that in their months of exploration and travel. It was the thrill of the chase, the possibility of being the one. Treasure hunts, secret messages, and hidden things seem to exert an irresistible appeal. They're fun to look for and to talk about. And this fact of human psychology has been exploited in computer games since the earliest days. It finds expression in the hidden surprises we call Easter eggs.
単に物理的に遠い
Atari's Stephen Wright is credited with coining this term in the first issue of Electronic Games magazine.
目白ぎするとそう
The
なり
first
かねない
Easter egg in a commercial computer game appeared in an early Atari 2600 cartridge called, simply enough, Adventure.
あれ消した
By a sequence of unlikely movements and obscure manipulations, players could discover a secret room where the words
少し調節してみ
created
ま
by
した
Warren
どうでしょ
Robinette
う
appeared in flashing
あ
letters.
マイクの向きが
Over the decades, Easter eggs and their evil twin, cheat codes, have become an industry within an industry. Entire magazines and websites are now devoted to their carefully orchestrated discovery and dissemination. They're part of our toolkit,
こんな感じで
our basic
あ
vocabulary, the language of computer game design. Computer gamers may have been the first to refer to hidden surprises as
これならいけ
Easter
るだろ
eggs, but we certainly weren't the first to use them. Painters, composers, and artists of every discipline have been hiding stuff in their works for centuries. The recent advent of VCRs and Laserdisc players with freeze-frame capability exposed decades of secret Disney erotica. Thomas Kincaid, the self-appointed painter of light, amuses himself by hiding the letter N in his works. A number beside his signature indicates how many N's are hidden in each painting. Picasso, Dali, Raphael, Poussin, and dozens of other painters concealed all kinds of stuff in their paintings. A favorite trick was hiding portraits of themselves, their families, friends, and fellow artists in crowd scenes. El Greco loved dogs, but the Catholic Church forbid him from including any in his sacred paintings. So he hid them, usually within the outlines of celestial clouds. Composer Dmitri Shostakovich chafed under the political censorship imposed by the Soviet Ministry of Culture. His symphonies and chamber works are loaded with hidden signatures and subversive subtexts which, had they been recognized, would have sent him to Siberia. Mozart's opera, The Magic Flute, is filled with musical allusions to the rituals of the Freemasons, the ancient secret society of which he and his mentor Haydn were members. But the most famous purveyor of Easter eggs is that champion of the late Baroque, the ultimate musical nerd, Johann
バ
Sebastian
ッハに
Bach.
言及するからこの BGM な
Bach
のかな。
was a student of gematria, the art of assigning numeric values to letters of the alphabet. A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, etc. By comparing, sequencing, or otherwise manipulating these numbers, secret messages can be
これはね、バッ
concealed.
ハよくやるよ。
Bach took particular delight in the geometriacal numbers
14小
14
節の主題とか。
and 41. 14 is the sum of the initials of his last name. B equals 2, A equals 1, C equals 3, and H equals 8. 41 is the sum of his expanded initials, J.S. Bach. These two numbers show up over and over again in Bach's compositions. One of the better known examples is his setting of the chorale Vor deinem Thron. The first line of the melody contains exactly 14 notes, and the entire melody, from start to finish, contains 41. Another of Bach's favorite games was the puzzle canon. A canon is a melody that sounds good when you play it on top of itself, a little bit out of sync. Frere Jacques and Row, Row, Row Your Boat are familiar examples of simple two-voice canons. But a canon can employ any number of voices, and you don't have to play each voice the same way either. You can change the octave, transpose the key, invert the pitch, play it backwards, or any combination. Finding melodies that make good multi-voice canons is a fussy and difficult art, of which Bach was an undisputed master. Now, in a puzzle canon, the composer specifies the basic melody and the number of voices, but not the relationship of the voices. The student has to figure out the position and key of each voice, and whether to perform them inverted and or backwards. Bach wrote quite a number of puzzle canons. The most famous, BWV 1076, is part of a fascinating story. One of Bach's students was a fellow by the name of Lorenz Misler, founder of the Society of Musical Science. This elite, invitation-only institution devoted itself to the study of Pythagorean philosophy and the union of music and mathematics. Its distinguished membership reads like a who's who of German composers, including Handel, Telemann, and eventually Mozart. Applicants for membership in the society were required to submit an oil portrait of themselves, along with a specimen of original music. With nerdly efficiency, Society member number 14 decided to combine these admission requirements into a single work. He sat for a portrait with Elias Hausmann, official artist at the court of Dresden. This portrait, which now hangs in the gallery of the town hall in Leipzig, is the only indisputably authentic image of Bach in existence. The Hausmann portrait shows Bach dressed in a formal coat with exactly 14 buttons. In his hand is a sheet of music paper, upon which is written a puzzle canon for 6 simultaneous voices. In 1974, a manuscript was discovered which proved that this canon was the 13th in a series of exactly 14 canons based on the ground theme of the famous Goldberg variations. As if these musical gymnastics weren't enough, Bach liked to hide messages in his compositions by assigning notes to the letters. His initials, B-A-C-H, correspond to the pitch sequence B-flat, A, C, and B natural in German letter notation. This theme makes its most memorable appearance in the last bars of his final composition, The Art of Fugue, published soon after his death in 1750. The word fugue comes from the Latin fuga, which means flight, as in running away. So the art of fugue is the art of flight, the art of taking a theme and running with it. Bach wrote hundreds of fugues, but none as sublime as this sequence of 14. In the last and most complicated fugue in the series, the first and second sections develop normally. This is followed by the BACH signature, and then suddenly, without any warning or structural justification, the fugue stops, dead in its tracks. One of the composer's 20 children, his son Carl Philipp Emanuel, claimed that Bach died moments after those last few notes were written. This story is probably apocryphal. The Easter eggs in Bach's music are a pleasant obscurity, known chiefly to professors and students of Baroque music. But in March of 2002, when this lecture was first delivered, those Easter eggs were the talk of the entire classical music industry. Sitting near the top of the classical music charts that month was a compact disc on the ECM label called Morimer. It was performed by the Hilliard Choral Ensemble, together with a talented but, until then, little-known violinist, Christoph Poppen. The music on Morimer is based on a geometriacal analysis of Bach's Partita in D minor for solo violin. This analysis, by German professor Helga Thon, assigns numeric values to the duration of notes, the number of bars, and the German letter notation of the partita. In doing so, she claims to have discovered the complete text of several liturgical ceremonies encoded in the notes. The CD presented these hidden texts superimposed over the original music. The result was strangely melancholy, dark, haunting, and very, very popular. Quite a few music critics attacked this disc. They didn't buy Professor Thon's analysis, dismissing it as a combination of numerology and canny marketing. Their caution was not without basis. Numerology is a slippery slope down which many a fine mind has slid to its doom. Allow me to offer an amusing anecdote from my own experience. Back in the early 90s, before the internet took off, one of the more popular online bulletin board systems was a service called Prodigy. I bought an account on Prodigy so I could join a fraternal interest group and gossip with fellow members around the country. One day, a stranger appeared on our bulletin board. Right away, I knew we were in trouble. This fellow, whose name was Gary, began spouting all kinds of apocalyptic nonsense about worldwide conspiracies, secret societies, and devil worship. At first, we tried to be polite. We questioned his sources, corrected his histories, logically refuted his claims, and tried to behave in a civilized manner. But instead of soothing him, our attention only made him worse. His conspiratorial warnings became urgent, approaching hysteria. He began to threaten people who disagreed with him. To coin a phrase, Gary went all uppercase. But his most urgent warnings weren't about the gays, the Jews, the Rockefellers, or the Illuminati. According to Gary, the greatest enemy of mankind was Santa Claus. Gary claimed to possess a secret numerical formula that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Santa Claus was an avatar of the Antichrist. Intrigued, we pressed Gary to reveal his formula. In doing so, we walked right into his trap. We should have known he had a book to sell. I fell for it. I sent him the $15. Less than a week later, the book arrived. Above an ominous photograph of the Washington Monument was emblazoned the title, 666, The Final Warning. Inside this privately printed 494-page monster, Gary reveals a simple geometriacal formula, which he claims was developed by the ancient Sumerians. This formula assigns successive products of 6 to each letter of the alphabet. A equals 6, B equals 12, C equals 18, etc. Imagine my dismay when I applied this ancient formula to the name Santa Claus and obtained the blasphemous sum of 666, the biblical number of the beast. I went on Prodigy and reported to the stunned members of our interest group that Gary was right after all. There could be no doubt that according to the unimpeachable wisdom of ancient Samaria, Santa Claus was the Antichrist. I then went on to point out several other names which, when submitted to Gary's formula, also produced the sum 666. Names like St. James, New York, and New Mexico. Soon the bulletin board was filled with discoveries like computer, Boston tea, and most sinister of all, sing karaoke. Gary left us alone after that. I got my $15 worth. But Gary is hardly the first person to connect secret codes to the Bible. People have been looking for Easter eggs in the Bible for hundreds of years. The Hebrew mystical tradition of Kabbalah can be described as a geometriacal meditation on the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. The advent of computers has made the application of numerology to the Bible fast and efficient. The latest spate of Bible searching was instigated by a book published in 1998 by Michael Drosnin, a former Wall Street Journal reporter. His book, The Bible Code, applied a skip cipher in which every nth character in a text is combined to form a message. By applying his skip cipher to the Hebrew text of the Old Testament, Drosnin claimed to have discovered predictions of World War II, the Holocaust, Hiroshima, the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin and both Kennedys, the moon landing, Watergate, the Oklahoma City bombing, the election of Bill Clinton, the death of Princess Di, and the comet that collided with Jupiter. He also found predictions of a giant earthquake in LA, a meteor hitting the Earth, and nuclear Armageddon, all scheduled to occur before the end of the last decade. The Bible Code spent many weeks on the bestseller lists, spawning several sequels and dozens of imitators. The Bible has certainly attracted its share of crackpots, but for the real hardcore egg hunters, nothing can rival the ingenuity, the tenacious scholarship, the stubborn zeal of those who seek the answer to the ultimate literary puzzle, a poisonous conundrum that has squandered fortunes, destroyed careers, and driven healthy, intelligent scholars to the brink of madness and beyond. Who wrote Shakespeare? The essays and books devoted to the Shakespeare authorship problem are sufficient to fill a large library. Several such libraries actually exist. Not even a day-long tutorial, much less an hour lecture, can begin to do justice to this complex, bizarre, and dangerously tantalizing story. Nevertheless, for the unacquainted, I will attempt to summarize the issue in a few paragraphs. The undisputed facts of Shakespeare's life and career could be scribbled on the back of a cocktail napkin. We know for a fact that a man named William Shakespeare was born in 1564 in or around the village of Stratford-upon-Avon. We know that he had a wife and at least 3 children. We know he bought property in Stratford, was involved in several lawsuits with his neighbors, and died there in 1616, aged 52. We also know that during those same years, a man with a last name similar to Shakespeare worked as an actor on the London stage, eventually becoming co-owner of some of the theaters there. We also know that about the same time, a number of most excellent poems and plays were published in London under the name Shakespeare. We do not know for a fact that the landowner in Stratford and the actor in London with a similar last name were one and the same man. We do not know for a fact that either man had anything to do with the poems and the plays. All we know is that those poems and plays have, in the 400 years since their composition, come to be regarded as a pinnacle of Western culture. The works attributed to Shakespeare appear to have been written by a man or woman who knew something about just about everything. They're filled with references to mythology and classic literature, games and sports, war and weapons of war, ships and sailing, the law and legal terminology, court etiquette, statesmanship, horticulture, music, astronomy, medicine, falconry, and, of course, theater. Therein lies the problem. How could a farmer's son of uncertain schooling, from a mostly illiterate country village, a man of practically no account at all, wield such encyclopedic learning, with so much eloquence and wit, so much wisdom and human understanding? For the first 150 years, nobody questioned the traditional history of the bard. Then, in the late 18th century, Reverend James Wilmot, a distinguished scholar who lived just a few miles north of Stratford, decided to write a biography of the famous playwright. Dr. Wilmot believed that a man as well educated as Shakespeare must have owned a fairly extensive library, despite the fact that not a single book or manuscript is mentioned in his will. Over the years, he speculated,
いや、また音止まっちゃった。
on their way into local
気にな
collections.
りますね、少し。
And so, the good Reverend Doctor scoured the British countryside, taking inventory of literally every bookshelf within 50 miles of Stratford. Not a single book from the library of William Shakespeare was discovered. Neither were there found any letters to, from, or about Shakespeare. Furthermore, no references to the folklore, local sayings, or distinctive dialect of the Stratford area could be found in any of Shakespeare's writings. After 4 years of painstaking research, Dr. Wilmot concluded, to his own dismay, that only one person contemporary with Shakespeare of Stratford had ever demonstrated the wide-ranging education and expressive talent needed to compose those poems and plays. That man was the multilingual author, philosopher, and statesman, inventor of the scientific method, chancellor to the courts of Queen Elizabeth and King James, Sir Francis Bacon. Dr. Wilmot never dared to publish his theory, but before he died, he confided it to a friend, James Cowell, who, in 1805, repeated it to a meeting of the Ipswich Philosophical Society. The members of the society were suitably outraged, and the scandalous matter was quickly forgotten. Then, in 1857, a lady from Stratford, Connecticut, published a book called The Philosophy of the Plays of Shakespeare Unfolded. In this book, Miss Delia Bacon, no relation to Francis, claimed that the works of Shakespeare were written by a secret cabal of British nobility, including Sir Walter Raleigh and Sir Philip Sidney, as well as Sir Francis Bacon. Delia Bacon's book electrified the world of letters. Battle lines were drawn between the orthodox Stratfordians and the heretical Baconians. Literary societies and scholarly journals were formed to
これ
debate
映
the
像と言い
evidence.
つつほとんど
Hundreds of
音声
pamphlets,
だなって思ってたけ
newspaper
ど、
articles, and
後ろの
essays
月
were
動い
published
てるし、
defending each
だんだん
side
欠けてきてる
and
よね。
ridiculing the opposition with that self-aggrandizing viciousness peculiar to tenured academics. Armed with her explosive book, Delia Bacon journeyed to Stratford-upon-Avon and, unbelievably, obtained official permission to open Shakespeare's grave. However, when the moment came to actually lift the stone, Delia's self-doubt precipitated a catastrophic nervous breakdown. She later died penniless in a madhouse. Around 1888, things began to get a bit out of hand. U.S. Congressman Ignatius Donnelly of Minnesota became interested in the Shakespeare controversy. One day, browsing through his facsimile copy of the first folio of 1623, he noted that the word bacon appeared on page 53 of the histories and also on page 53 of the comedies. He also noted that Sir Francis Bacon had written extensively on the subject of cryptography. Donnelly began counting line and page numbers, adding and subtracting letters, drawing lines over sentences, circling words, and crossing them out. The result was a complex and virtually incomprehensible algorithm, which he claimed was invented by Bacon to hide secret messages inside the first folio. The greatest Easter egg hunt in the history of Western civilization had begun. Here are just a couple of the sillier highlights. A doctor named Orville Owen of Detroit constructed a bizarre research tool he called the Wheel of Fortune. This wheel consisted of two giant wooden spools wrapped with a strip of canvas 2 feet wide and 1,000 feet long. Onto this canvas, he glued the separate pages of the complete works of Bacon, Shakespeare, Marlowe, Greene, Peele, and Spencer, together with Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy. By cranking the spools back and forth, Dr. Owen could quickly zip across the pages in search of clues and cross-references. Employing a large team of secretaries and stenographers, Owen claimed to have uncovered a complete alternative history of Elizabethan England, as well as several entirely new Shakespeare plays and sonnets. Listen to this hidden verse, supposedly penned by the mighty bard himself, which inspired Dr. Owen to build his Wheel of Fortune. Take your knife and cut all our books asunder, and set the leaves on a great firm wheel, which rolls and rolls, and turning the fickle rolling wheel, throw your eyes upon Fortune, that goddess blind, that stands upon a spherical stone, that turning and inconstant rolls in restless variation. After publishing 5 thick volumes of this rubbish, Owen announced the discovery of an anagram, indicating that Bacon's original manuscripts were buried near Chepstow Castle on the River Wye. Owen spent the next 15 years and thousands of dollars excavating the bed of the river with boat crews and high explosives. He died before anything was found. A fellow named Arnsberg wrote an entire book based on the analysis of the significance of a suspicious crack in the tomb of Bacon's mother. A Ray of Sanity finally appeared in 1957. To those familiar with the science of cryptology, the name William Friedman needs little introduction. During World War II, Colonel Friedman was the head of the U.S. Army's Cryptoanalytic Bureau. He is credited with cracking the Japanese Empire's most sensitive cipher. After the war, the colonel decided to apply his expertise to the study of the Shakespeare ciphers. He interviewed several of the experts in the field and prepared a detailed scientific analysis, which he published under the title The Shakespeare Ciphers Examined. His conclusion? In a word, bunk. According to the standards of cryptologic science, not one of the hidden messages purportedly discovered in Shakespeare's works was plausible. The rules used to extract these messages from the texts were non-rigorous, wildly subjective, and unrepeatable by anyone except the original decipherer. The people involved were not being dishonest. They were channeling their preconceptions. They were trapped in a labyrinth of delusion, mining order from chaos. Anglers in a lake of darkness. Lear, Act 3, Scene 6. You would think that Friedman's cold and ruthless exposure would be enough to silence the heretics once and for all. Not a chance. The books and TV specials and websites and conferences and doctoral dissertations keep right on coming. I should point out that the Shakespeare authorship issue is not only the preoccupation of cranks and weirdos. A substantial number of respected authors and Shakespeareans have expressed serious doubts about the traditional origin of the plays. The list includes Nathaniel Hawthorne, Ralph
マジで
Waldo
1時間
Emerson,
コースかもしれ
Walt
ないこれ
Whitman, Henry James, Sam Clemens, Sigmund Freud, Orson Welles, and Sir John Gielgud. Living skeptics include the artistic director of the New Globe Theatre, Mark Rylance, Michael York, Derek Jacobi, Kenneth Branagh, and even that most revered and scholarly of contemporary Shakespearean actors, Keanu Reeves. The current leading candidate for the authorship is Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, a theory first proposed in 1920 by an English schoolmaster with the
フーガ
unfortunate
の
name
技法を
J.
ね、コン
Thomas
トラプンク
Luna.
ス1から順に再生してるあ
What
たり
is it
で、
about Bach,
まさかこいつ全部流す気かとは思ったんだけ
that
ど、
inspires this intense scrutiny?
マジで全部流れる可能
Nobody's
性がち
looking
ょ
for
っと出てき
acrostics
た。
in Chaucer or Keats.
これで
There are
半分
no
くらい
hit
なんだよ、あの曲。
CDs of the secret chorales of Wagner or Beethoven. For the answer, we need to recognize the unique roles which the Bible and Shakespeare have played in the development of Western culture. No other single work of literature has influenced modern English more than the translation of the Holy Bible published in 1611 under the auspices of King James I. The King James Bible exemplifies the meaning of the word classic. It has been called the noblest monument of English prose, the very greatest achievement of the English language. It has served as an inspiration for generations of poets, dramatists, musicians, politicians, and orators. Countless people have learned to read by repeating the phrases in this, the only book their family possessed. Our constitutions and our laws have been profoundly shaped by its cadences and imagery. But even the glory of the King James Bible, compiled by a committee of 46 editors over the course of a decade, pales before the dazzling legacy of the Swan of Avon. The lowest estimate of Shakespeare's working vocabulary is 15,000 words, more than 3 times that of the King James Bible, and twice the size of his nearest competitor, John Milton. His poems and plays were written without the aid of a dictionary or a thesaurus. They didn't exist yet. It was all in his head. When Shakespeare had a thought for which Elizabethan English had no word, he invented one. The Oxford English Dictionary lists hundreds of everyday words and phrases which made their first appearance in the pages of the Bard. Addiction, alligator, assassination, bedroom, critic, dawn, design, dialogue, employer, film, glow, gloomy, gossip, hint, hurry, investment, lonely, luggage, manager, switch, torture, transcendence, wormhole, zany. Hamlet alone contains nearly 40 of these neologisms. Who today would have this audacity, this giddy exuberance of invention? Only one other English author even approaches Shakespeare's facility for coining new words: Sir Francis Bacon. In the modern era, the record holder is Charles Dodgson, better known as Lewis Carroll, who, interestingly, also happens to be the second most quoted author in English, after Shakespeare. Everyone has been profoundly molded by the influences of the King James Bible and Shakespeare. Like it or not, all of us peer at the world through the lenses of these great works. They are the primary source documents of modern English thought, the style guides of our minds. Contemplating these dazzling jewels of wisdom and eloquence gives rise to an extraordinary feeling, a potent, rare, and precious emotion with the potential to completely upset your life. An emotion powerful enough to make a man abandon his wife and children, forfeit career and reputation, lay down his possessions, and follow his heart without questioning. That sweet, sweet fusion of wonder and fear, irresistible attraction, and soul-numbing dread known as awe. Awe is the grail of artistic achievement. No other human emotion possesses such raw, transformative power, and none is more difficult to evoke. Few and far between are the works of man that qualify as truly awesome. It is awe that convinces a rabbi to spend a lifetime decoding
また音が途切れましたね。
awe that sends
申し訳
millions
ない
of visitors each year to the pyramids
環境が
of
悪
Giza,
くて
Guadalupe,
あ
and Mecca.
15デシベル
It was awe that drove poor
10落として
Delia
た
Bacon to her doom.
ちょくちょく音が
Now,
途切れるのは、ね、
please don't
申し
come
訳
away
ないと
from
思っ
this
てます
lecture thinking that the key to awesome game design is the installation of Easter eggs. Ordinary games with their contrived Easter eggs and cheat codes are like the Battery of the Month Club. You have to trudge down to the back of the store to get what you really came for. If superpower is what people really want, why not just give it to them? Is our imagination so impoverished that we have to resort to marketing gimmicks to keep players interested in our games? Awesome things don't hold anything back. Awesome things are rich and generous. The treasure is right there. One afternoon, I was sitting alone behind the counter at that old Radio Shack store. My boss had stepped out for some reason. An elderly woman walked through the front door. Like most of our customers, she was shabbily dressed, probably on a fixed income. I assumed she was there for her free battery, but instead, she placed a portable radio on the counter. This little radio came from the days when they boasted about the number of transistors inside on the case. It was completely wrapped in dirty white medical tape. The woman looked at me and asked, "Can you fix this?" Slowly, I unwrapped the medical tape, peeling away the layers until the back cover of the radio fell off, accompanied by a cloud of red dust. The interior of the radio was half eaten away by battery leakage and corrosion. I looked at the radio. I looked at the old woman. I looked back at the radio. I reached behind me, where the expensive alkaline batteries were hanging like prescription medication, and removed a gleaming 9-volt cell from its gold blister cap.
9ボルト電池ってなんだ
Then I pulled a brand new transistor radio from a box, installed the alkaline, and helped the lady find her favorite station. No money changed hands. She left the store without saying a word. Awesome things are kind of like that. Bach offered his students very specific insight into the source of awe. In addition to BACH, 2 other sets of initials are also associated with Bach's music. These initials are not hidden in the notes. Instead, they're scrawled right across the top of the manuscript for the whole world to see. The initials are SDG and JJ. SDG stands for the Latin phrase Sole Deo Gloria, to the glory of God alone. JJ stands for Jesu Juva, help me, Jesus. Bach wrote all of his great masterpieces sub specie eternitatis, under the aspect of eternity. He did not compose only to please his sponsors or to win the approval of an audience. His work was his worship. Bach once wrote, "Music should have no other end and aim than the glory of God and the recreation of the soul. Where this is not kept in mind, there is no true music, but only an infernal clamor and ranting." The name of the power that moves you is not important. What is important is that you are moved. Awe is the foundation of religion. No other motivation can free you from the limits of personal achievement. Nothing else can teach you the art of flight. Computer games are barely 40 years old. Only a few words in our basic vocabulary have been established. A whole dictionary is waiting to be coined. The slate is clean. Someday soon, perhaps even in our lifetime, a game design will appear that will flash across our culture like lightning. It will be easy to recognize. It will be generous, giddy with exuberant inventiveness. Scholars will pick it apart for decades, perhaps centuries. It will be something wonderful, something terrifying, something awful. A few years ago, I was invited to speak at a conference in London. My wife joined me, and we took a day off for some sightseeing. We decided to visit England's second biggest tourist attraction, Stratford-upon-Avon. It was cold and rainy when our train arrived. Luckily, most of the attractions are just a short walk from the station. We visited Shakespeare's birthplace, a charming old house along the main street, which attracts millions of pilgrims every year, despite the complete lack of any evidence that Shakespeare was born there or even lived anywhere near it. We went past the school where Shakespeare learned to read and write, although no documents exist to prove his attendance. We visited Anne Hathaway's cottage, the rustic country farm where his wife spent her childhood, although no record shows anyone by that name ever having lived there. Finally, we came to the one location undeniably associated with Shakespeare, Trinity Parish Church, on the banks of the River Avon, where a man by that name is buried. This beautiful church is approached by a long walkway between rows of ancient gravestones shaded by tall trees. The entrance door is surprisingly tiny. No cameras are allowed inside. The interior is dark and quiet. Despite the presence of busloads of tourists, the atmosphere is hushed and respectful. A few people are seated in the pews, deep in prayer. An aisle leads up the center of the church. The left side of the altar is brightly illuminated. On the wall above is a famous bust of the bard, quill in hand, gazing serenely at the crowd of pilgrims. On the floor beneath, surrounded by bouquets of flowers, at the very spot where Delia Bacon lost her mind, gravestone of William Shakespeare bears this dire warning. Good friend, for Jesus' sake, forbear to dig the dust enclosed here. Blessed be the man who spares these stones, and cursed be he that moves my bones. Every year, 3 million pilgrims arrive from every nation on earth to approach this stone and consider the likeness of a man whose body of work can only be described as awesome. By contrast, The right side of the altar is dark and featureless. Nobody of any consequence is buried there. The only point of interest is a wooden case of simple design, carved of dark oak. Inside the case, sealed beneath a thick sheet of glass, lies a large open book. A plaque on the case identifies this book as a first edition of the King James Bible, published in 1611, when Shakespeare was 46. Not many pilgrims visit this side of the altar. Most of those that do simply glance at the book, read the plaque, and move along. A few, more observant, note that the Bible happens to be opened to a page in the Old Testament, the book of Psalms, chapter 46. No explanation is given for this particular choice of pages. For the initiated, none is necessary. If you are of inquisitive bent, if you are intrigued by English history and literature, if you value your peace of mind, cover your ears now. In the year 1900, a scholar noticed something about the King James translation of Psalm 46. Something terrifying, something wonderful. The 46th word from the beginning of Psalm 46 is shake. The 46th word from the end is spear. There are only two possibilities here. Either this is the finest coincidence ever recorded in the history of world literature.
チャット GPT に3行くらいにまとめて
It
くだ
is
さい。
not.
自分チャット GPT 好きじゃないからな。
The earth revolves around only one sun.
いいじゃない、こういうのを1時間聞くのも。酒を
The moon happens to be
クラスの
400
中で
times
ぐるぐる
smaller
回しながら
than the sun. The sun happens to be 400 times
スミレ
farther
のリキ
away.
ュールなんてちょっとおしゃれ
And
な
the
もの飲んじゃ
apparent
ったりしてね。
paths of the moon and sun in our sky
優雅な夜だと思いま
happen
すよ。
to intersect exactly
聞き取りにく
twice
いかな、
every night.
喋り方とか。
Which means that every now and then, at long yet precisely predictable intervals, the lunar disk slips across the face of the sun and just barely conceals it for a few wonderful, terrible minutes. A fine coincidence, no? In June of 1977, a little man with divergent eyes and a talent for mischief ascended a hilltop in the British village of Ampthill. At the summit of this hill is a tall, slender cross, a memorial to Catherine of Aragon, the first wife of Henry VIII. The sun, high in the south, cast the shadow of the cross upon the grassy hillside. At exactly 12 noon, the man removed from his pocket a bar magnet. He turned the magnet so its north pole was facing south and buried it under the shadow of the cross. 2 years later, a few hours before the publication of his first book, the man returned to that hillside, this time in the dead of night. He used a compass to locate the magnet he had buried. In that same place, he dug a hole in the ground and placed inside a ceramic container inscribed with the following words: I am the keeper of the jewel of masquerade, which lies waiting safe inside me for you or eternity.
あ、終わりそう。曲的にも。マジで全部聞いたな、曲。 マジか。最初に恐れてたことが真実となりましたね。終わったんでしょ？あれあ、まあちょっと余韻があったってことですね。いやーよかったね。長かったね。ちょうど1時間くらいかな。自分の配信のあれを見る限り58分とか59分とかそのくらいだったのかな。長かった。まあそうね、自分はこういう映像を見るの普通に今終わった。普通に好きだからそれなりに楽しんで聞いてたけど、まあ退屈な人とかは人によってはねあるよね。この話を音楽と IT が登場して最後にふさわしすぎるのか、それは本当にそう。しかも一番長かったしね。一番長かったし、音楽の話と、音楽っていうかまあ芸術系、シェイクスピアもだからの話と、そこは自分のやってきた専門分野だし IT も好きだしで、すごい一番いい順番で見られたんじゃないかな。それはすごい良かったにしたってどうなんだろう、このゲーム配信とか動画でやる人が今の部分を実際にそのコンテンツに載せるとして、その間自分と同じスタイルでずっと黙ってるのか、割と喋りながら聞くのか、まあでもこれ長すぎるから動画にできないな。1時間黙り続けるって結構勇気がいると思うんだよね。だからなかなか動画勢だと200倍速とかされてる。まあそうなるよね。200倍速して4秒くらいごめん、そんなことないね。全然そんなことないね。60倍速で1分だから200倍速って20秒とかだ。そうか、結構。いやでもすごい面白い話だったと自分は思いますよ。すごく良かった。まあなんでそれがここにいるのかが本当にわからないけどなんでこの順番なんだろうね、ここの並び。なんかここから読み取れるものがあったりするのかな。島の一部分と同じデザインになってるとか、そういうわけじゃないんだろうな。それはちょっと不思議だね。コメントがついたら右の概要欄にあるようにコメントを返事優先にしてるから普通に喋るけどさ、見てる途中でこれって思って何か言おうと思ったことは見終わった後に言おうと思ってたの。あんまりその音を遮ってまで喋りたくはないから。ただ忘れたわ、長すぎて何も喋れない。全部忘れてしまったもう完全に音声作品だったね。音声作品って言い方すんのかな。映像じゃなくって、まあ最初に日食だか月食だかエクリプスの話をしてたけど、でそれの映像がずっと流れていたけど、別に後で回収するというかそういう感じでもなかったし、これがシークバーみたいに使えるのは知ってるけど、そうなんかシークバ みたいなのがあったなって思ってさっき見たんだけど見つかんなかったんだけど、これかな。おお、これいいね。飼育バーの機能性は結構捨て去ってるけど、扱いやすさは捨て去ってるといえば、あ、ここでなんか書いてあるじゃん。捨て去ってるけど、その UI というか世界観みたいなものを壊さずにすごくよく考えられた設計ですよね。いやー、これな、これも長かったな。これってもしかして逆方向なんだ。逆向きなんだね。こう戻ってくタイプなんだ。巻いて。待って。うまく。スキームバイプロフェッサーモリアーティ。モリアーティって人知らないな。いやー、全部聞いたね、バッハ。まあ14のところまでだったけど、一番最後の本意の部分はなかったような気もするけど。フーガの技法はについてそんなに話すあれでもないかな。あれはいい作品ですよ。いい作品だからいろんな人にこう聞いてもらいたいけど、さすがに長いのでちょっと気軽に人に勧められないっていう悲しさはあるね。昨日買ってきたバイオレットリキュールが結構減ってる。あとさっき買ってきたコンビニで買ってきたジンが半分なくなってる。あとさっき出した角瓶がなくなってる。やばい。今日はね、飲んでないんですよ。お酒じゃなくてお薬。酔い止めの薬飲んでなくて、このゲームをやると多分吐くからできないんだけど、このゲームの残る要素っていうのはボイスログの他になんかある。やってないパズルが、まあだから風景パズルかな。あれ、ここじゃなかったっけ。それにしてもこの配信でチャット GPT っていう言葉をまた口に出す時が来るとは思わなかったな。自分はあれに散々振り回されたからもう使わないと心に決めたんだけど。雑談しよっか。余韻というか、それほど関係のある話をできるわけでもないんだけど、この4つの映像の中で長かったけど、やっぱ今のが自分の趣味というかやってることと関係があるっていう意味も含めて今の映像が一番好きだったね。長いけど本当に長いけど、で結局誰の話なのかモリアーティが誰だか知らないけどね。 ああいうの大学でずっとああいう感じの話聞いてたし、まあ普段の過ごし方としてそういう話を聞いてることっていうのはあまりないけど、ドキュメンタリーというかっていうのはあまりないけど、聞くのは好きだし、読むことはあるかな。ちょっとコントローラーの充電の残量、いっぱいか。ならいっか。待って、音がでかいね。違う、これ自分のつまみの問題だ。ちょっと腰が。どうだろうね。だから動画だと200倍速とかされてるっていう話も今聞けたけど、どうなんだろう、やっぱり勇気が必要だよね。さっきと全く同じ言い方しちゃうけどさ、自分はさ、こういうスタイルでの配信をしてる、なんていうの、こう視聴者が楽しいような映像作りみたいなのそんなに気にしてないからそんなにっていうか全くと言っていいくらい気にしてないから、音質が良くて画質が良ければそれ以上のことはいいかなくらいに考えてるから、だから1時間ほとんど無言でこういう話を聞き続ける、見続けるだけっていうのは、自分のスタイルだと特に何とも思わずに普通にできるけど、なんか YouTuber を自称する感じで、要するに視聴層を稼ぎたいタイプの人は難しいよね。動画だって1時間超えちゃうし、動画が1時間あったら自分は喜ぶんだけど、好きな投稿者の動画がね1時間あったら、今回長い、嬉しいって思うけど、ただなんか今の流れというか現代的な感覚としてちょっと短くまとめないと見ないよっていうのがあるらしいし、だからそういうのも含めてどうなんだろうねとは思う。でも面白かったね。やるって言いながら2年越しになったけどよいしょ、ちょっとマイクの位置を戻しますね。喋るために顔の前にマイクを設置してると画面が見えなくなって邪魔なのよ。だから顎の下のあたりにマイクを移動してたんだけど、ちょっと戻しますね。ちょっと音量上げようか、マイクの。で、雑談モードなので配信タイトルも変えとこうか。これでいいや、適当でちょっと手洗いていきますね。 今の話をした人は、まあ IT の人なんだよね。ゲームプログラミングをやってる人で、でまあなんかアーティスティックなことに対しても造詣の深い人ですごく教養のある人が話をしていたんだろうなっていう感じがずっとあったんだけど、で音楽っていうのを理系か文系か理系の人っぽい感覚でやるものか文系の人っぽい感覚でやるものかっていうのを分類しようとすると意外と理系だっていう人が多いの。まあそういうふうに言う割には自分が行ってた音楽大学はなんか計算とかあんまりちゃんとできないパソコンも使えない理系要素他にないなっていう人が多かったけど、でもまあその音楽に対するアプローチっていうのは文学的なものよりも数理的なものの方に寄りがちなので、だからバッハが14にこだわるっていう話もあった。バッハのアート・オブ・フーガフーガの技法のまあ第14巻の最後の方に第3主題として BACH バッハの主題が出てきて、直後にまあ強制終了する音楽がかなり急に終わるんだよね、あれね。そこで急に閉じたっていうか、もう本当に途中で作曲が続けられなくなってしまったくらいの感じで、もう予兆もなければ終わったっていう処理もないくらいの感じでブツッと終わるんだけど、その直前に BACH の主題がね出てくるってね。ドイツ音名だと B が C のフラットで ACH がラード C のナチュラルっていう風に、まあ、並んでくるので、あんまりメロディー的に綺麗な音にならないから作曲家はそれで作曲しようとすると結構苦労するんだけど、どうするんだろうね。まあ S ドゥアとかで異調してとかっていうのが王道になるのかな。結構、ね、難しいんですよ。でそうだから BACH の主題っていう話を作曲家が音名とまあ作曲家の名前とか地名とか単語の文字を一個ずつ当てはめて、それで主題とするってそんなに珍しくない。3人に1人くらいやってんだけど、バッハっていうのはまあ都合よく全部音名だし、まあその標的にされやすい。でそれの話をしようとすると、リストのバッハ幻想曲 BACH 新幻想曲とかが多分一番やり玉に挙げられやすいというか代名詞的に扱われてるのかな。リストは BACH の主題を使うことでバッハに敬意を示そうとしたみたいな説明をまあふわっとする人が多分多い。それって敬意なのかなとは自分はちょっと、そこの解釈は人によって変わると思うけど、 BACH の主題っていう風になるとバッハ本人がやってるものの他に今言ったリストのもの、プーランクの 名前にね BACH ってないんだけど、プーランクのワルツに明らかにそれを主題にしたものとかある。あとゴドフスキーの BACH の主題による左手のためのフーガとかね、まあ意外とある。他だと BACH に限らなければシューマンのアベック変奏曲、作品番号1だから最初の作曲した曲、公開した曲はアベック ABEGG。 あれはねバッハの主題と違ってね、そのまま落とし込んだ主題が綺麗だからすごいいい曲に仕上がってんだけど難解さがない。アベグ変奏曲はそう そう ABCH で書かれてるし、ショスタコービチとかも、ショスタコービチくらいになるとさ、さっきショスタコービチの話してたね、くらいになると名前がさ結構めんどくさいんだよ。ラテン語に移してもSCHOSTAKOVICH みたいな感じになって、音名に当てはめられるものがあんまりないからマトリックスにするんだよね、作曲家は。その時魔法陣みたいに ABCDEFG まあ H まで横に並べて改行して、同じ数横に並べて、で縦の線を見て、ここは B の列だから B の音だみたいな、例えばだけどね、例えばの話だけど、そういうマトリックスにして自分の名前を、メロディーとして曲の中に織り込もうとするっていうのは、ショスタコービチ近現代になる直前くらいのところでよく起こったんじゃないかな。セリエリズムというか、無調の傾向に入るとそういうのはあんまりできないから、だからかなり限られた時代での話になるけど、その複雑な音面の扱いはね結構ありますね。でもバッハが最初なんじゃないかな、そういうことをやりだしたのは。14にこだわるっていうのもそうだし、12音名じゃない、1オクターブ内の音の数にすごいこだわる。だから12、24曲書いて全部違う調にするとか、24はクラシックではかなり重要な数字だよね。24の変奏曲、24の前奏曲とフーがどうたらこうたら全部の調を扱うっていうのは一つ企画化されてる感じがする。なんか画面変じゃない？そういうことか、そういうことか。バッハのそう、さっき聞いてて思ったんだけど、ドレスデンのことトレズデンみたいな発音してなかったそもそもバッハのことずっとバックって言ってたよね、今のナレーションの人すごい気になった、それ。話の主題に全く関係ないけどずっと気になってた。確かにドイツ語の CH はアメリカっていうか英語の発音だとクに一番近い。それこそバック、後ろ、背中とかの意味のバックとほとんど置き換えられるんだと思うんだけど、中国人が英語のサンキューを3グラムの油っつって覚えるみたいな話で、その発音を自国の単語に置き換えるとしたら、多分英語圏の人にとってセバスチャン・バッハの音は背中を意味するバックとほとんど同じ発音になるんだと思うんだけど、そこに置き換えると思うんだけど、あの音ないからね、多分。英語にあんのか、なんだっけ、口外水視察音だっけ、なんかドイツ語の先生がそんなこと言ってたけど、そんな名前はどうでもいいのよ。喉の奥をするだけの音。 日本語だとね、バッハはバッハじゃなくてバッハって、日本語っぽくバッハって言って母音をそのまま落とせばほとんど同じ音になるから、ドイツ語のバッハと、だから割と都合よく聞き取りやすいけど、もともとねそういう音がないとね、ああいう風になるんでしょうね。でもバックはやめてほしいけどねまあハッとは結構似てると言われれば似てる気はする。音を出す位置が近そうな感じはするし、わからなくはないけどね。そもそも CH でクって読むもんね。クロームとかクロノとか。ちょっと他出てこないけどだからさ、ドイツ語の CH はさ、アメリカ語、なんで自分アメリカ語って言うんだろう。英語圏の人にはさ、GH を発音する時の音ですっていう風に言えばいいと思うんだよね。ほとんど同じになると思う。まあ、母音が U になる時の話だけど。テトリスでもやりながら喋りますか。日付が変わるくらいまで。画面が眩しい。音でか。音でか。マジで音でか。絞ろう。こんなもんでいいだろう。やばいやばいやばい。なんか左目がよく見えない。やめた。左目がよく見えないのは何なんだこれ。いつもさ、テトリスとかさ、マインスイーパーとかやった後にさ、瞬きの回数が減るからよく目が見えなくなるっていうことをさ、よく言うけどさ、ウィットネスの映像でも同じこと起こったわ。単に目疲れてるだけなんだろうな、これ。以前、疲れ目かなんかのことを調べてるだか誰かと話してるだかしてるときに、まあそれなりの年の人、自分から見て、つまり4、50代くらいの人がさ、年のせいで目が疲れるようになったんだよねっていうこと言ってて、いや疲れ目は起こるぞと肩こりみたいなもんで体質とかもあるだろうけどさ、別に若くても起こるしさ、そもそもそこって年の影響あんのかっていうふうに思ってたんだけど、自分の過去を振り返ってみると確かに前より目疲れやすくなってる気がするんだよね。10年前とかよりは。やっぱなんかあんのかね。まあ多分生活が不健康だからだと思うんだけど世界で一番不健康。生活の不健康さを保とうとしてるから自分。最近の食生活健康すぎるなとか言って補給するんで。でもそう、小学生くらいの時は もうそれこそ休みの日朝から夜までずっとゲームやってて、夜になっても仰向けでずっと DS 持ってて、ドラクエやってて、寝落ちくらいのレベルになってて、朝起きたら充電の切れた DS が顔の横に落ちてるみたいなだってもう普通に見えてたし、言うほど目が疲れたっていう感覚なかったけど、高校生くらいかなから疲れ目っていう感覚が出てきて、目が痛くなる、疲れすぎて。今になってそこからさらに10年経つと2時間くらい画面見ただけでさ目疲れるんだからさ、何なんだろうねこれね。絶対年のせいじゃないと思うんだよね。年のせいにする年じゃないし、眼性疲労みたいなのが堆積してんのかな。エンダーレライズ配信でやってみる？いやー、一人でやるタイプのゲームだよな。ビジネスやりながら次のゲーム考えようとか言ってたけど考えなかったね。一回眼性疲労を完全にリセットしたい。何でもいいから人と顔合わせなくて済むなら目の上に眼球の上にお灸を置いてもいいから、痛くても苦しくてもいいから一回ちょっとリセットしたいね。何もない状態に戻したい。もう思い出せない。目が疲れていない状態を思い出せないし、体が健康な状態も思い出せないから、基準として一回全部リセットして、そっからもう一回ちょっと今のところに戻っていきたい。今の自分の不健康さを実感したいね。するためには一度戻らなきゃいけない。本当にね、文字が読めなくなるんだよね。困る。コメントがね、無理なのよ。見えないのよ。よく。やっぱ棒読みちゃん仕込むか、読み上げさせるか。でもなんか最近自分難聴疑惑出てんだよねなんだっけ、なんとか性難聴みたいなやつ疑惑出てるんだよね。まあ多分違うと思うけど、てかもういいけど、聴覚には自信あるんで、その上でこれ以上耳が良くなっても自分は生活できなくなって困ってしまう。選挙カーとかで失神するようになりそう。ちょっとマイクの指向性が前より高く感じるのは何だろう。ポップガードの配置とかで集音というか何かが違うのかしら。そんなに影響するか？だってそもそもこの状態で喋ってもそんなに音変わらなくない？いや結構違うわ残念ながら結構違いますね。普通にこれなしで喋った方がクリアに聞こえるのはそうかもしれん。そうか。でも高いマイクだからさ、ちょっとポップガードなしで喋る勇気はないんだよね。ケーニヒメイヤー、ちゃんとしたやつですよ。ちゃんとしたやつ買ってもこんな音なんだもん。じゃあダメだよね。ポップガードあり、ポップガードなしまあバフってなるけどね。 ダメだ。ポップガードからいい匂いがする。この音って直接出てる音混じってる？あ、混じってないわ。止めちゃおう。止めてしまおう。てかさあれ？ちょっと待って。あったあった。バイオレットリキュール買ってきたからさ、ブルームーンでもやろうかなと思って。いや、話の順番が違うな。イエーガーマイスターを切らしたから、お酒を買いに行ったんですよ、昨日。それで足筋肉痛になったんだけど。往復で。やばいくらい筋肉痛になったんだけどね。悲鳴上げながら歩いたもん、昨日の夜。今も痛い。まあ、それはまあ、どうでもいいといえばどうでもよくって。筋肉痛になってまでさ、酒屋に出てきたんだから、イエーガーだけ買って帰るのも尺じゃない。だから物色してたの。そしたら、まあちょっと珍しいなと思って、その、バイオレットリキュールが置いてあるのが。そこらの酒屋だとなかったりするからさ。ね、生協とかさ。声優はあるかな、ギリギリ。いや、声優ないな、そういうリキュール系、でかいところじゃないと。なんか声優とかそういう、声優じゃないや、生協みたいな、普通の街のスーパーとかだと、リキュール？スミレのリキュールみたいなのは置いてないじゃない。だから、これはなかなか買えないぞと思って、それを手に取ったの。でもさ、スミレのリキュール、バイオレットリキュールをそのまま炭酸水で割って飲むのも美味しいけど、それがあるんだったらさ、フィズとかさ、ブルームーンとかさ、なんかカクテルがやりたくなるのが人情ってもんじゃないで、自分はブルームーンが結構好きなので、じゃあよし、ブルームーン作るぞと思って買ってきたんだけど、ジンがないってことに今日気づいて、さっき配信始める2時間前くらい。自分は5時か6時くらいにお酒を出すんですよ。飲むかどうかは一旦置いといて。で、お酒を出して、だいたいそれを飲みながら夜ご飯を用意してっていう生活を、自分料理嫌いだから飲みながらじゃないと料理やってらんないっていう、そういう理由でね。どうしてもないときは料理酒を飲む。だからそのために飲める料理酒にしてんだけど、なんか丸とか辛口一本とかそういうのにしてんだけどそうだから晩酌っていう言い方をする割には別に夜の9時とか8時から飲み出すわけじゃなくて、ちょっと時間が早いんですよ。だからジンがないのに気づくのも5時か4時かくらいだったんだけど、なくって、でじゃあコンビニでジン買ってきたら、ジンとバイオレットリキュールというよりあれパルフェタムールなんだけど、まあ同じかになんかレモンジュースとか入れてさ、レモン水は置きがあるので、じゃあこれでできるじゃんって思ったらさ、あれシェイクするタイプのカクテルなんですよ。なんていうのかな、アルコールの強さをあんまり感じたくない、その飲みやすい系のカクテルだけど度数は高いみたいなカクテルはだいたいシェイクするの。シェイクスピアがすごい頭をよぎるな。 なんかいろんな説があるけど、とりあえずシェイクするとお酒のなんかきつさが和らぐんですよ。だからそれのためにシェイクするんだけど、でシェイカーも一応持ってんだけど、それは実家に置いてあることに気づいてさすがに今から実家まで行ってこれ持ってくわっつってさ、シェイカー取ってくる気にもならない。まあシェイカー使ってんの自分だけだからなんとも別に今度行った時に持ってくる分にはそれでいいんだけど、普通に置いてきちゃってて、まあ要は激しく混ぜれば何でもいいんですよ。でできれば空気がいっぱい入ってほしい。だからなんか卵溶くみたいにさこうお箸でカシャカシャカシャって言ってもいいんだけど、ちょっと荒れすぎるけどね、見た目が。でまあどうのこうのって考えた末に、さっきなんていうのかな、プロテインシェーカーみたいなやつ、プロテインっぽいものをよく口にするんですよ。プロテインってまあその名の通りタンパク質じゃない、タンパク質いっぱい取れる粉、牛乳とか水とかに溶かして飲んでくださいみたいな、それとほとんど同じなんだけど、栄養素がなんかもっといろんなものが入ってて、ベースブレッドとかあるじゃない、ベースフードだっけ、栄養食、完全栄養食、これだけ食べてればとりあえず生きていけますよみたいな、それと同じような構成になってる粉、水に溶かして飲むやつ、すごいいいんですよ。家族に勧めるとこれは泥だっつって、まずい、食えねえって言って酷評されたけど、まあ粉溶かして飲むだけだし、意外とお腹にたまるし、洗い物も少ないし、いろいろ楽で、噛む必要もなくって食事スキップできる感じが一番気に入ってて、それのためのシェイカーっていうのもついてきたやつがあるんだけど、プロテインシェイカーではないんだよね。まあ物は同じだと思うけど、粉溶かすだけだから何が違うのかも多分買って見比べても分かんないと思うけど、それにお酒を入れてたらね、ちゃんとカクテルになったよだからそういうの持ってる人はシェイカー買わないでいい。ちょっと内容量が多すぎてすげえ泡立つのが欠点だけど、まあ、そこは量を調節するんですよ。自分っていうかシェイカーっつったら350か500ミリ、に氷いっぱい入れて、まあカクテルは50から100ミリくらい、350なら入れる感じになるのに対して、プロテインとかのシェイカーだと多分倍は入るから3倍くらい入るのかな、下手すりゃ1リットルとか、1はいかないか、まあでもだったら3倍の量をお酒入れればいいだけなんで、全部飲まなきゃいけないけど、全部飲めばいいだけなんでおすすめですね。一回やってみるといいまあお酒がこうガンとこう来る、どの強い酒を飲んで喉が焼ける感覚を楽しむんだよみたいなやばいやつでもないか、そういうタイプの人だったらわざわざシェイクしないでステアでもいいんだけど、そういうのができるのが宅飲みのいいところですしね泡が入れば何でもいいんですよ。アイスクリームメーカーは泡入んないか、お酒には。ミルクフォーマーとかでねぶっこんでザーって回すとねいいよあれ、おすすめ、簡単にできる。なんかあんじゃん、カフェオレを泡立てるための機械、先端がぐるぐる、先端のちっちゃい 泡立て器みたいなのがモーターでぐるぐる回る機械、あれをねスクリュードライバー、スクリュードライバーっていうカクテルの由来を考えてもできるんだろうけど、スクリュードライバーとかそれこそブルームーンとかピニャコーレアダとか、そういうシェイクするタイプのカクテルの材料を全部こうコップにマグカップとかに注いでそこにこうミルクフォーマーぶち込んでぐるぐる回すのおすすめ。ちゃんとカクテルの味になる。この場合氷を入れなくてもいいのがいい。氷入れなくても攪拌される。要はちゃんと混ざってすごい攪拌されて冷えればいいんですよ。で、氷が溶けすぎると水っぽくなるから、それが防げればいいから、そういうミキサーとかミルクフォーマーみたいなのを思いっきり混ぜて後から氷入れて調節するとか、機能美の極みですよ。機能美、合理的、合理を極めてる。悪いことじゃないからね。ミルクフォーマーが普通に多くの家庭に一個置いてあるものかといったらそれも怪しいけど、自分実家にあったんだよね、ミルクフォーマーが。今時1500円ぐらいで買えるしね。なんか会社の飲み会の余興のビンゴの2等とかにありそうじゃない2ほど高くないか。以前父がそれで当てた、なんだっけ、ホットサンドメーカーとかもらってきてて、すごい扱いに困ってるのを見た覚えがあるよ。お前これ使うって言って、使わねえよっつってあれは多分メルカリとかに流れたんだと思うんだけど、メルクリウス。その後のことはそんなに知らないけどね。実際のところ自分はそんなに父と会話しないので今何時だ？ちょうど12時前だな。12時過ぎたところで配信を終わりにするかもうちょい喋るかを判断して終わりにしよう。終わりにしようというか、それに従って終わりにしよう。今日の配信すごい満足感があるな。自分何もしてないけど何もしてないけど、でも普段の雑談配信よりなんかしてるか。大誤算というか、思った2倍かかったけど、映像を全部見るのに。でもそれも計画的に配信とか動画とか投稿とかしてる人にとってはただの誤算だろうけど、自分にとってはあれは普通に面白かったから嬉しい誤算ではあるし、ゲームなんてね、長く楽しめれば長く楽しめるほどいいんで、全ての要素が長ければ長いほどいいんですよ。だれなければ。なんかちょっとエンコードでドロップしてんな。いっか。そんなもんだろう。あとは著作権のあれを食らわないかが問題だね。これで何も食らわなければ 自分今後の配信に勇気を持てる。ちなみに今のところ警告というかストリームのアドバイスとかにはそういうの出てない。いけるんじゃねこれ。明日が楽しみですね。明日配信で何しよう。何マインスイーパーつったっけ昨日は。あの地獄。うわぁ。今日はなんかすごい鼻が詰まるな。だって日付が変わったんじゃないか。変わって1分経ってるわ。終わりにするか。これ以上続けても酔っ払うおじさんがぺちゃぺちゃ喋るだけだから。おじさんを自称するのやめようか。おじさんじゃないし。あれ今いくつだ？26？ ん？あれ？どっちだ？2000年生まれの人が今年で24になるんだよね。だからプラス2で今年で26になるんだ。時間かかったね今。そうそうそう、また20中頃なんでね。ど真ん中なんでね。おじさんじゃないんですよ。普段の振る舞いがね、めちゃくちゃ好意的に言ってくれる人は大人っぽいっていう言い方をしてくれるけど基本的に老けてるっていうことをね常々言われてるんで、年相応の感じを出さなくては。20歳 ?20 中盤の年相応ってどんなだ？ 20 中盤って落ち着いてんのかな？若さに溢れてんのかな？どっちなんだろう。わかんないな。全然知らない。20中盤の知り合いあんまいないから知らないわ。あんまっていうか一人もいないからサンプルがなくて困りますね。配信しながらなんかゲームの映像を見てハイボールグラスに大量のウイスキーをハイボールの量のウイスキーをそう、それでぐるぐる回しながら飲んでる人ですね。完全におっさんだよね。残念ながら。配信のコメントとかでももっと老けてると思ってたみたいなさ、4、50代くらいだと思われてる率の高さを考えるとね、なんだかなという気もしますけど。でも自分17歳の時にね、ずっと27歳だと思われてたんだけど、そう考えるとそろそろ年相応になる頃ですよ。ということは年相応なのか今がほぼ。今そこに近づいてるんだ。このままでいい。まあこすってあだこうだ言ってるけど別にどうでもいいんですけどね。間違えた。 今何分だい？ 4 か。じゃあ5分か。どうしよう。じゃあ5分になった瞬間に配信終わりにしようって言おうと思ったら言う前に5分になっちゃった。そういうのいいから、危ね、終わりにするか。また明日ということで。明日は、マインスイーパーかミンハヤになるのかな。そういうのが。ただ、今思ったけど、最近の自分、本当にパズルっぽいゲームしかしない。なんか、テトリス、マインスイーパー、ウィットネス、マインスイーパー、テトリス、ミーハヤみたいな。ウィットネス、ミーハヤ、テトリス、IQ ファイナルみたいなさ。そういう配信しかしてないよね、最近。それ以外と言ったら雑談しかみたいな。なんか一回アクションゲームとか挟んどくか。マンネリは良くない。ちょっと自分の過去の配信のタイトルを見返して終わりにしよう。今回で、前回がウィットネス、雑談、ウィットネス、雑談、多分テトリスとか IQ とかやって、その前に原神やってんだ。で、オブザベーションデューティー、雑談オブザベーションデューティー、ミンハヤ、オブザベーション、雑談、オブザベーション、雑談、アークナイツ雑談、マインスイーパー、雑談、マインスイーパー、アークナイツ、マインスイーパー、マインスイーパーばっかだな。こいつマインスイーパーしかやらないなって思われてそう。まあ、いっか。ちょっと明日は何やるか。でもね、自分よくね、配信終わるときに、終わる雰囲気出すために明日はこれやるわみたいなこと言うけど、その通りにならないことの方が多いんで、またこいつなんか言ってるよって思ってくれた方がいい。そう、終わる雰囲気出すために言ってるだけなんで。明日はこれやるからって言い出したらさ、終わりそうじゃない？次回予告みたいな。そういうことですよ。明日って金曜日？じゃあ今日だ。金曜日だ。そうか、ゴミ出ししないとめんどくさ。ゴミ出してから寝るか。じゃあ終わりにしますね、配信を。OBS どこだ？お疲れ様。